Okay, let's get into this. Welcome to the deep dive. You've brought us a stack of articles, reports, and notes detailing a truly heartbreaking event that's been unfolding recently in Queensland, Australia.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
We're going to take all of this information and, well, dive deep into the disappearance of 17-year-old Phoebe Bishop, the massive search that followed, and the really difficult discovery of human remains.
And what jumps out almost immediately from these sources is just how rapidly the police investigation shifted gears.
Yeah.
And maybe the most surprising part, how serious charges could be laid even before they actually found the body.
That's exactly it. That's what caught my eye, too. So our mission today, using this material you've shared, is to really try and piece together the timeline, understand how investigators managed to gather and use crucial intelligence,
hmm
and see what this case tells us about building a complex picture when things aren't, immediately obvious. It's a challenging story for sure, but there are some fascinating insights here into modern police work. So let's start right at the beginning. Phoebe Bishop's last known movements. This was back on May 15th, 2025.
Right. So the information we have says she was last seen around 8:30 in the morning. Location? Bundaberg Airport Drive.
Okay.
And the details mentioned, she was carrying luggage, dressed for travel. Think of green tank top, gray sweatpants, ready to go.
She had a whole trip planned out, didn't she? Bundaberg to Brisbane.
Yep, connecting to Perth. Headed to Western Australia to visit her boyfriend.
That was the plan.
That was the plan. But the absolutely critical and tragic fact is she never made it onto that flight. Never checked in.
And hasn't been seen or heard from since that point.
Not since then, no.
Police moved quickly, though, which seems significant. A missing persons alert went out the very next day, May 16th.
Yeah, and right from the get-go, it wasn't treated like a standard missing person case.
Mhm.
The police stance, and it's quoted here, was that it was immediately suspicious.
Suspicious from day one.
Yeah, exactly. Detective Acting Inspector Ryan Thompson is quoted saying something like, people don't vanish, which implies they suspected foul play really early on. That sets a whole different tone.
It really does. And certain people were identified pretty quickly in the investigation.
Yes, James Wood, who's 34, and Taneka Bromley, 33,
And they were.
Phoebe's housemates. They lived together in Gingin, which is about 50 kilometers west of Bundaberg.
Okay.
And reports suggest they were the last people known to have seen her. They allegedly drove her towards the Bundaberg airport that morning.
Okay, so naturally, the initial search focus was right around there. Bundaberg Airport Drive, Samuels Road area, Gingin itself.
That's right. Police were putting out appeals pretty much straight away for dash cam footage, CCTV, anything from May 15th in those eras.
But what's really telling, I think, about how seriously they took this from the start,
Yeah.
they didn't just search broadly, they designated specific crime scenes very early.
Yes, 2 key locations. And this is before it officially became a suspected homicide investigation, which is quite proactive.
Right, that's key. So what were the locations?
They secured the Gin property, the house where Phoebe lived with Wood and Bromley. And they also declared the gray Hyundai I-35 vehicle owned by Taneka Bromley as a crime scene.
The car they were supposed to have driven her in.
Exactly, the car she was believed to have traveled in. Locking those down for forensics so early, it really suggests they were already focusing hard on potential evidence points,
Yeah.
maybe based on initial statements or, something that just raised red flags immediately.
Okay, that early proactive step makes a lot of sense in hindsight. And from there, the investigation, it didn't just stay local, did it? The search escalated pretty quickly, became much more targeted.
Absolutely. It suggests they were really building a case, suspecting foul play was involved. We see the deployment of specialized units,
Like what?
cadaver dogs, a dive squad searching waterways. These aren't resources you bring in unless you have a strong reason to believe you might be looking for a body.
And the main search area that emerged was quite specific. Goodnight Scrub National Park.
Yeah, that's about an hour's drive from where Phoebe was last seen. Focusing so heavily on a remote national park like that, it strongly suggests the police weren't just guessing. They were likely working off some kind of specific, compelling intelligence.
Not just a random sweep.
Definitely not. And what's significant here is that during those earlier search phases in the park, investigators did find things. The reports mention locating and seizing several items of interest.
Items of interest, what does that mean?
Well, they don't specify exactly what, but items they believed were connected to the investigation. These were sent off for forensic testing. Finding something out there, even early on, likely provided crucial leads, helped narrow things down.
But police also suspect that evidence might have been moved?
Yes, that's a challenge, they noted. A suspicion that evidence might have been moved from the Goodnight Scrub area before they even secured it. That immediately suggests investigators believe there were deliberate attempts to hide things, to cover tracks.
Which brings us to the big question then. How did they zero in on this remote park with such focus, especially if things might have been moved?
The information is quite clear on this. The sources state this shift, this focus, was driven by the discovery of phone data and telecommunications data.
Ah, the digital trail, guiding the physical search.
Precisely. The accounts really emphasize how this digital evidence let police pinpoint the location independently. It gave them a way to navigate what's described as really unforgiving terrain.
Right.
And crucially, it helped them maybe overcome those potential attempts at concealment. It's a powerful example of modern digital forensics, literally directing boots on the ground in a tough environment.
Yeah, you can see it in the timeline provided in the sources, how quickly it went from a missing person alert to these specialist units zeroing in on that national park. Just days, really.
And the other details back this up. The forensic work on the house, on the car, the specific appeals about vehicle movements, all those resources poured into the park. It all seems underpinned by intelligence, especially that phone data.
And this is where the story takes that really striking turn, the legal developments, things happening before any remains were actually found.
This is such a pivotal moment in the case, I think. It really demonstrates the strength of the evidence police must have felt they'd already built. Based on all that intelligence, the early forensics.
So what happened?
The reports say, June 4th, police suspend the active search operations and James Wood is taken into custody.
Okay. But then, wasn't he released initially?
Yes, the very next day, June 5th, he was initially released without charges, which must have been, well, confusing for anyone following closely.
A short release, though.
Very short. Because later that same day, June 5th, both James Wood and Tonica Bromley were rearrested, and this time they were formally charged.
And the charges were extremely serious.
Incredibly serious. 1 count of murder and 2 counts of interfering with a corpse for each of them.
Interfering with a corpse, that charge alone speaks volumes, doesn't it? Especially being laid before a body was found.
It's profoundly significant. It explicitly tells us that police had already concluded, based on the evidence they had without finding Phoebe, that she was deceased. And not only that, but that deliberate actions had been taken to conceal her body.
The sources also mention, just sort of in the background, that Wood and Bromley had faced some unrelated weapons charges previously.
Yes, that detail is included, though it's separate from the charges directly related to Phoebe's disappearance and suspected murder.
But what really underscores the strength of that pre-discovery evidence are the specific allegations police made public, right, before finding the remains.
Exactly. Detective Inspector Craig Mansfield is quoted. He stated police would allege Phoebe was murdered. And significantly, that her body had been moved more than once from that Goodnight Scrub National Park area.
Moved more than once. Okay. And there was that specific detail about the car, too, the gray Hyundai.
Yes, a critical allegation. Police stated their forensic evidence, and the telecom data indicated 3 people arrived near the airport in that Hyundai, but only 2 got out.
Implying Phoebe never actually left the vehicle at the airport.
That's the implication.
Yeah.
Directly contradicting the initial story that she was dropped off there to catch her flight.
Wow. So making those kinds of detailed allegations public before the discovery, it just highlights how much weight the police must have put on that circumstantial evidence, the digital evidence, the forensics from the car and house.
Clearly enough to establish probable cause for charges as serious as murder and interfering with a corpse, even without the victim's body at that stage. It's quite remarkable.
And then finally, the critical breakthrough came. The reports tell us June 6, 2025, around 2:30 in the afternoon.
That's when human remains, tragically believed to be Phoebe Bishop, were discovered by specialist police units.
And the location.
Near Goodnight Scrub National Park, close to Jin Jin, right where all that intelligence had been pointing.
So the discovery wasn't another random search, it was targeted based on recent findings.
Exactly. It's noted that this came after a brief search commenced after further inquiries and investigations. And critically, this happened on the same day the charges were laid.
So the legal action and the final search were directly linked.
It really shows how the intelligence-led case, culminating in those charges, directly informed and, well, enabled that final successful search effort. One thing led directly to the other.
The reports mention some initial observations about the remains.
Yes, a few things. Consistent with the time frame of the disappearance, found not too far from where they'd been searching intensely in the national park anyway. And notably, the reports state the remains did not appear to have been buried.
Not buried. What might that suggest?
It's hard to say for sure, but it could imply, perhaps, a rushed attempt at concealment. Or maybe it ties back to that police allegation about the body being moved multiple times. Maybe any initial attempt at burial was disrupted. It's speculative, but it's a detail they noted.
And immediately after the discovery, standard procedure. Crime scene declared.
Yes, a formal crime scene was established right there, and forensic examinations began on site.
And that terrain issue probably came up again, that unforgiving terrain police kept mentioning.
Almost certainly. It likely made the initial search incredibly difficult and time-consuming. And it could also complicate the detailed forensic work needed at the recovery scene itself. Just adds another layer of difficulty in collecting every piece of evidence.
Right. It connects back to that idea of suspected evidence movement, too. Rugged terrain offers places to hide things, but also makes everything harder for investigators.
A real challenge on multiple fronts.
So bringing us up to the present, based on the latest information in these sources, what's the current status?
Well, as of the latest reports we have, the remains haven't been formally identified as Phoebe Bishop just yet. Police have been clear that formal identification requires comprehensive forensic testing, and that, may take some time.
It's a process.
It's a necessary process for absolute certainty, though preliminary testing did confirm the remains are definitively human.
Okay, so confirmed human, but formal ID pending. What about cause of death?
Work is underway on that too. Understandably, details aren't being released publicly, partly out of respect for the family, but also because determining how she died is obviously crucial evidence of the murder charges.
Crucial for the prosecution's case down the line.
Absolutely.
And legally, where do things stand with Wood and Bromley?
They appeared in court on June 6th, the same day the remains were found, and were remanded into custody.
Meaning they're being held.
Correct. Their next scheduled court appearance, according to the sources, is set for August 11th, 2025.
So the legal wheels are turning. The timing of the formal ID and cause of death results might affect later stages. But as we discussed, the charges were laid based on that other compelling evidence.
Exactly. The discovery of the remains now provides incredibly strong corroboration for those charges already laid, especially the interfering with the corpse counts. It adds that concrete physical evidence that aligns with the picture built from the digital and forensic data.
Of course, beyond the investigation and legalities, there's the immense human cost here.
Absolutely. This has had a devastating impact on Phoebe's family and the whole Gen Jin community.
Phoebe's mother, Kylie Johnson, shared her grief publicly. The reports quote her words, incredibly moving, describing the news as just ripping her apart. Unimaginable.
It's just heartbreaking. And you see the community response reflecting that shock and grief. Reports mention floral tributes being laid, a candlelight vigil held in Colon Community Park.
A way for the town to come together.
Yeah, a space to grieve collectively. The local mayor also spoke about the disbelief in the community, the need for support. It's clearly hit that small town very hard.
And while these are deeply personal responses, that kind of community engagement, the family appeals, sometimes they do help investigations by keeping things visible, maybe jogging someone's memory.
True. But perhaps just as importantly, it's a vital part of how a community starts to process and heal from something so shocking.
So looking back at everything in these sources, what's the main takeaway? We've traced this from a missing person alert through a really complex investigation driven by intelligence, especially digital footprints, to these serious charges, and then the tragic discovery.
For me, what stands out most powerfully is how investigators built such a strong case. Strong enough to lay charges of murder and interfering with a corpse based on evidence like telecommunications data, forensics from the house and car, witness information all before the victim's body was found.
Yeah.
It really highlights the evolving capabilities of modern policing, the power of combining different types of evidence into a coherent, compelling narrative.
Forensic analysis is still ongoing, obviously, for the formal ID and cause of death, and the case is now moving through the courts with the accused remanded until August.
Which leaves us, and you the listener, with something to think about perhaps. This case is such a profound example of police gathering and interpreting incredibly diverse evidence. You've got the traditional crime scenes, witnesses, but then layered with the highly technical analyzing phone data, digital forensics.
Pulling all those threads together.
Exactly, to build a picture of what happened, even when facing challenges like difficult terrain or potential concealment, it really makes you consider, how are the digital footprints we all leave every single day fundamentally changing how criminal investigations work. Sometimes, maybe they become the silent witnesses that help uncover the hardest truths.